I shall now introduce the next keynote speaker. She is Dr. Teng Siao, Assistant Dean, Strategic Engagement, Office of Educational Research and Education Research Scientist, Center for Research in Pedagogy and Practice at NIE-NTU. Okay, Dr. Teng is an education research scientist. I've mentioned that already. Okay, she is trained as a sociologist. She has taught and researched in the United Kingdom, Taiwan, and Singapore in both academic and think tank settings. Her research in education centers on diversity and equity. In particular, the research projects she has worked on include youth's lived experiences of multiculturalism, school-to-work transitions of vocational students, students' funds of knowledge, and immigrant parents' education involvement. Let's now welcome Dr.
All right. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I'm here to share with you about my project, which closed last year. It's on navigating diversities and differences in Singapore, an exploratory study of lower secondary school students' intercultural mindedness. This topic for today, I will limit myself to talk mainly about ethnicity because we did touch on quite a number of diversity markers. But I think to go slightly deeper into discussion, I will just focus on ethnicity today. Okay, so this is my research team. I'm the PI, and we have Dr. Madiana and Heidi. We have our RA Sanam and Roshni, and of course also our MOE collaborators, Tavam, Angeline, and Melvin. Okay, so this is the structure of my presentation. I'll just share with you the background of the study, the research design. The bulk of it will be on the key study findings, and then also I'll discuss about the implications of the findings. Okay, so some background to the study. I think I embarked on the study when there was increased diversification of Singapore population in the recent years, and studies like IPS surveys have started to show differences or maybe a little bit of tension, amongst ethnic groups in terms of how they perceive the state of, inter-ethnic relations in Singapore. And you can also tell from the top right-hand picture on diagram on the PSD title, Let's Talk About Race. I think there is increasing concern that, this is something that we need to converse over. Okay, and at that time also, when we look at the literature, there isn't much research done specifically at how students interact or how they, talk about ethnicity and race or even racism. There's the study in 2004 that Lee and her colleagues have done. There are some, to a limited extent, by researchers who looked into citizenship studies and as well as social studies, but they're not very extensive. So I think my project, in a way, is quite timely because I think by the middle of last year, there were those of you who have observed, ethnic discourses in Singapore. You will see that there's like the hype of all these discourses on racism and race in Singapore, and all the media, whether it's the TV, the radio, the newspapers, and even social media, they are all like organizing events and forums to talk about it. But yet, I think the general consensus is that, we're not very prepared. We're not sure how to actually talk about it. Okay, so this study hopes to then, look into the lived experiences of the students to see how we could better support them in negotiating differences as well as, okay, sorry, let me go back to that. Yeah, negotiating differences as well as their daily diversity encounters. And so we use the notion of everyday multiculturalism, right? Looking at the meanings that's constructed through interactions and encounters. And in my study, I tend to use intercultural learning rather than multicultural. Also the idea of, the how meanings are constructed during encounters, and what Suzanne mentioned earlier on, right? I think there's interconnectedness, interdependent. I think as the recent pandemic has shown, we are all intimately interconnected, and we need to look at how we interact with each other. So culture here refers to a way of life, and it's regarded as fluid, not static, right? And it's less a sum of characteristics and traits, okay, but more in relation, it's more relational and interactive, okay? And of course, intersectionality is another key term that informs the study. So here, whereas Suzanne just now talked about stories, right, as pedagogical tool, over here, I'm not going to talk about pedagogical approaches, but I think behind the need to look at students' experiences and voices is also this idea of intercultural dialogue, right, being a key pedagogical tool to improve intercultural learning. So this entails us using more student-centered approaches. Okay, experienced multiculturalism researchers has also noted that young people tend to be less regarded as civic actors or multicultural citizens in their own right. So their own complex realities of everyday multiculturalism has been overlooked. Okay, so this means that sometimes policies that's planned for them, around them, okay, may enable but also delimit some of the ways that's lived by the young people. Okay, so the objectives of my study to look at students' understanding and lived experiences, okay, in order to improve intercultural education, to look at their negotiations of differences and tensions, and how they use opportunity and spaces for intercultural interactions. Okay, the data is collected over a year when the students were in the middle of their Sec 1 studies and then to their Sec 2 studies. Okay, so a series of various qualitative methods, data collection methods were used. We have focus group, interviews, event observations, lesson observations, and banner design observation. Okay, so we also took into account the various representation, various diversity markers. We had 86 students altogether across 3 secondary schools, and then 32 of them were selected for individual interview participants. Okay, so the study findings. So first, I'll look at the general observations. Okay, so these are some of the sites that were mentioned by the students where intercultural interactions took place. Okay, so in school, you have, your usual school games, the classroom, school excursions, various activities. And of course, beyond school, you have your usual, malls where they hang out, the neighborhood playground, classes, or there's also gaming, the cyberspace and all that. So sources of intercultural understanding, right, include, apart from their personal experiences and eyewitness encounters, also include family members, peers, school messages, school posters, lessons, media, social media. Okay, so of course, we also saw that the students' lived experiences were mediated by various diversity markers, sometimes simultaneously. Okay, but diversity, sometimes when we look at diversities, we often look at differences, but we forgot that diversity is also as much about commonalities. Okay, so many of the students also mentioned that their friendships are based more on common interests, such as hobbies, CCAs, like music, K-pop, gaming and all that. Okay, so another general observation we noticed was diversities navigated through majority-minority asymmetries. We heard earlier from Suzanne about the racialized, or I would call it racialized, but usually we say racial or ethnic minorities being more marginalized or feeling more marginalized than the majority. But we also discover that majority-minority asymmetries does not occur just within racialized categories, but also linguistic categories and the religious categories, as well as nationality as well. Yeah. So many of the reported incidents of tension tended to occur in primary schools than secondary school. So we need to catch them when they're young. Some of the students do demonstrate their capability of change and adaptability. So if they have like prior misconceptions or stereotypes that their parents or adults passed on to them, some of them were able to correct that through their lived experiences, or through their encounters with new friends. Okay, so like in the quote here, one student said, many friends used to be racist, but they became less racist after learning about different cultures, and they even apologized for any offensive remarks. And I think this capability of change, of course, is important in education. So this one key theme that we see is the racialization of differences. Okay, the race predominates students' conception of difference, and this then would result in the conflation of race and other ethnic categories, such as nationality and religion. So for example, this student says that, there's a lot of people who mixed up Malay and Islam, and it's so stupid, okay? Because Malay is a culture, a race, right? Islam is obviously a religion, okay? And this in turn then resulted in certain intersectional identities given less recognition. So for example, an Indian Muslim student would feel that, she's always questioned, like, how come, you're Muslim, but how come you're not Malay, So because she or he doesn't fit into the norm of the larger group within the Indian community. So some of these people find it annoying. And another consequence of racialization is the concealing of intra-differences, right? So for example, this student feels that, she prefers to make friends with peers of other ethnicities because she doesn't feel, like an affinity with her own. So she says that, sometimes she sees, Indian people wearing what she sees as typical Indian clothing and all that, okay? But for her, like, they're too Indian, okay? And this last point here about racialization is actually observed by many researchers before me. So many of our students talk about culture in terms of racialized categories like Chinese, Malay, Indian, okay, and largely through the talk of food, festivals, and fashion, which is a pretty much surface level thing. Okay, so for reports about stereotypes, name calling, negative remarks, and all that, it's overwhelmingly minorities, racialized minorities. Okay, I don't think the Chinese has reported anything, Chinese majority in Singapore, but not the migrants. The migrants is a separate group. So the Indians especially have all these remarks about phenotypical remarks thrown at them. And then you see here, some of the words that were used against them: black dog, chocolate, killing, and all that. And then the Muslim Malay students have reported, being associated with stereotypes such as gangsters and terrorists, right? So here in this quote, one student shared with us about how, one of his neighbor, saw him in the condominium lift and was wondering, why there's a Malay living here, don't Malays, why aren't Malays mostly convicts and all that, right? So that's a very huge discriminatory stereotype. We also noticed that some anti-minority students tend to feel the marginalization more. So this is where intersectional identities come into play. And they tended to be males as well, okay? So this deserves more further exploration. Because they are, in some ways, people could say they are like doubly, marginalized, because anti, in a way, they're also a minority group in the school, right? And also considered the lower stream. Of course, we will no longer have streaming after 2024, but we are not sure about like how banding plays out, so probably time will tell. As for migrants, we also see reported cases of name calling and teasing. So go back to your country is a phrase often used. And unfortunately, it's not only thrown at migrant students from peers, but also educators. And in fact, we have like reports of like school principal using that too. And before we go on, right, don't be mistaken. Some of these educators have very good intentions. Okay, they may think that they are trying to discipline the students, right, either for their behavior or trying to get them to study harder, things like that. But they don't realize that some of the terms that they use are really quite hurtful. Okay, and all these could result in a sense of, or evoke a sense of exclusion and questions these minority students' sense of belonging. So you see a few quotes here. One student said, "I feel I didn't belong like, he didn't want me to be there because they wanted people of the same skin color, right? And then the second quote says, the second student says, it's good to show them how, people really feel inside, right? Because when you make fun of somebody's skin color or race, it really affects them inside. You feel like there's something wrong about you. Okay, and then of course the third quote here, right? This even leads to one person questioning, why are we born in this country? Okay. So sometimes as well, as young students go, they like to joke around, and sometimes it is a way of bonding. Okay, and many of them actually would tell us that, hey, we know our limits, we understand their boundaries. So we only joke with those we consider our best friends, good friends, and all that. So because they would know how to take a joke. Okay. But yet at the same time, right, we also hear from students who say that, they did not understand why a joke would backfire, when there was no intention to offend, but a friend took offense with it. Okay, so this seems to suggest that they may not be able to navigate boundaries so clearly. There's also a gendered difference in attitudes towards such behaviors. And we also witnessed like sort of male students being a bit more carefree about such jocular interactions because they think it's harmless. But female students tended to be more careful, and they would even, sort of remind their male counterparts not to say certain things because they think it's racist. Okay, but when you really look at the literature around like jocular behaviors, right, there's no hard and fast rules because humor or bantering can really bond people. But I think youths need to be alerted to possible scenarios when the jokes may bond and when they may bite. And especially when you have asymmetries, majority, minority asymmetries in the picture, right? Maybe the minorities may feel certain things which the majority don't see. Okay, so here there's this term called joking frame proposed by Amanda Weiss, right, which says that, maybe you have to look at whether the banter is reciprocal, whether it's symmetrical in terms of the power relations between the people involved. Okay, and another interesting thing that we noted is the variegated understanding of racism. Okay, we've asked the students in very, very different ways. Some of them we ask, like, oh, have you experienced racism? Have you witnessed racism? And then at different points, like, maybe in a focus group or individual interviews, we will ask them different things again, like, have you been excluded for certain reasons? Why and what is the reason? Have you ever felt like you don't belong? Or have you seen or witnessed, have you witnessed or experienced racial bullying? Okay, so we noticed that some would equate stereotyping and skin color to racism, okay, but some wouldn't, okay, because like a student would say that, she neither witnessed or experienced racism, but then she knew of peers who made fun of skin color, okay. And then there was yet another student who had in a focus group discussion told us that he thinks that there's no racism or very little racism in Singapore. But yet when we ask him, whether he had witnessed or experienced racial bullying, okay, he actually was able to respond with an anecdote, about his exclusion from a soccer game and being called names. So, like, what does this all mean? Like when we want to facilitate discussions among students or to get them to understand deeper what racism means, right? I think there might be a need for a common vocabulary. Okay, so there is also ambivalence we noted and even contradictions, okay, in the way they understand and respond to racism. So for example, this student, when we asked him, do you think we have racist people amongst us? Okay, the student said, yeah, we do, some people call others black. And then when we asked him whether he experienced it before, he said yes, but not really that affected. Okay, so we asked him how he reacted. He said, I take it as a joke, but it's something that shouldn't be said. Right? So it is very interesting because I take it as a joke, seemingly trying to make light of things, right? But yet he still feels that there's something wrong here. It shouldn't be said. So it's almost like he's taking it in his, he's taking it as his own responsibility to deal with this encounter by treating lightly of it. And yet another, this is a migrant student, right? He talked about how most people associate Filipinos being maids, right? And then he says that, yeah, most of the time they're associated with maids, and that's not a bad thing, but they say it as if it is. So when we ask him, then are you affected? And he says, no, because I'm not a maid. I don't know if you see the complexities of this, because initially he seems to suggest that there's nothing wrong being a maid, right? Because, well, you know, a maid is still proper work, right? Proper employment. Okay. But yet at the same time, he's trying to, I think it bothers him, but yet he doesn't quite know how to express it. And he distanced himself by saying that, oh, they're not talking about me because I'm not a maid. Okay, and other observations that we have seen is that, you know, some of these experiences that the students share with us, we would ask whether these are being addressed or whether these are being discussed in the classroom. And students, I think overwhelming number of them say that no, you know, they don't discuss such things, they don't talk about such things, right? And then some students think that maybe teachers are not willing or maybe not able to discuss it. And one student here, a more articulate one, actually said, you know, racism is something common here. That's what she said. And then she says that, you know, sometimes people talk about it a lot and make jokes about it, but the teachers here are very oblivious about the fact that we need to learn about these things. Okay. So she's afraid that, like, you know, they here, actually, she's talking about students, like, you know, they're going to learn about it later. Okay. But how it would all turn out if they learn about it later, we don't know. Okay, another interesting observation that we have made, you know, before we get all sucked into the, oh, okay, the majority-minority asymmetries, right? It would always result in, you know, certain scenarios. Because we were very pleasantly surprised by this unusual friendship between an ethnic Chinese student who was spouting racist remarks all the time during a focus group discussion, okay, and his ethnic minority class rep who was trying to stop him. So we had initially thought, okay, you know, maybe things would not go very well between them, but we were very surprised that when we were interviewing them individually later on, that one was waiting for the other, you know, to finish the interview so that they could go fishing together. So it is a very interesting scenario for us, you know, how fluid things can be, and especially when you consider that these are young teens, you know, age 13, 14, you know, they have their own way of dealing with things. And interestingly, the class rep later on told us that, you know, he understood why this particular Chinese student was appeared quite racist. And he actually said because he was bullied before in primary school, and he was putting up a front, you know, in order for himself not to be bullied. So it is a very interesting thing how you know, the youngsters negotiate this relations. So the current everyday multiculturalism literature also suggests that, you know, sometimes experiences of diversity is not contained in binaries of, let's say, you know, this is racism and that is not, and things could change, right? And also we noticed that amongst friendship amongst different two different migrant students who initially seemed very supportive of each other, seemingly had sharing a lot in common, but, you know, it's soured, right? Because one actually teased the other for having a darker skin. Okay, so okay, I need to wrap up soon. Okay, just very quickly go through the implications of the findings. Oops, sorry. Okay, so I think we need to go beyond surface cultural learning to deep cultural learning. Okay, we definitely need to take into account cultural fluidity, intersectional identities, as well as the diversities within categorical groups. So in a way, it's, you know, as Suzanne called for more complex, you know, stories to be told. I think even lived experiences, recognizing complexities of lived experiences is necessary. I think we need to give a space for students' voice here again, to co-construct their intercultural learning, not earning, but learning, and getting them to share their experiences, because these are the real life experiences that's relevant to them, and they have to learn how to negotiate, you know. And then, of course, to get them to question assumptions, challenge bias, debunk stereotypes, and if possible, establish an intercultural vocabulary to facilitate discussion and reflection. And perhaps building teacher capacity, right? Getting them to consider majority-minority asymmetries when organizing logistics of interaction and dialogue, right? Recognizing fluidity, uncertainties, and even recognizing emotions when facilitating conversations like that. Okay, equipping them with the knowledge about complexities of identities and privilege. I think that is something that we may need to do. And also having a repertoire in order for teachers also to reflect on their own assumptions and biases and to guide the students. And perhaps the school leadership could also support a more open and safe school culture, right? Because honestly speaking, right, I don't think you have, this is not content, right? We're not really talking about, you know, you just learn 1 to 10 and you master it. This is something which is ongoing, and you probably need to navigate more skillfully. So, and also we noticed that quite a number of schools engage external vendors, which is a very good idea because, you know, when teachers have a lot to do or may not necessarily be the experts in this domain, right? You get external experts to come and help. Okay, but very often these are short-term engagements and it's one-off. And we also notice that teachers sometimes pay deference to the experts and they just take a back seat. Okay, but we notice those teachers where teachers are more involved or like reinforces, you know, the learning with youths, right? The youths actually, you know, are engaged better. Okay, so further research and policy considerations. I think probably there should be further research into the students' negotiations of differences and tensions, teachers' needs and challenges in facilitating intercultural conversations and education, and also enhancing intercultural learning at primary school. Okay, thank you very much. If you're curious about what these pictures mean, you can ask me later.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Teng.